Okay, welcome everyone. Viet, just confirming, are we welcoming people into the room?
Yes, folks are starting to trickle into the room right now. I would give it just a second, just because people's computers move at different speeds. I would wait maybe a minute before we do the introductory remark.
Excellent, thank you. We're thrilled to have everyone join us here today. We'll just give everyone a second to arrive before we begin. Welcome everyone who's trickling in. Viet, why don't you give me the signal when we reach our quorum?
I think Viet's dropped off. It's now off to Ashna, but I think we can be good to go in like a minute.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, Tiff, we're at 12:02. Why don't we get going? So again, hello and welcome everyone. A big thanks for coming to spend an hour with us. It might be your lunch hour, or if you're in a different time zone, it might be a different hour. But we're thrilled to have you. We know there is a lot going on in in Canada and in the world these days. So we're very grateful for your interest and attention in this very important issue of generative AI and youth privacy. So my name is Andre Cote. I'm the Director of Policy and Research at the DAIS. We are and Tiff, I think we can hop to the next slide. We are a public policy and leadership think tank at Toronto Metropolitan University. Our work really focuses at the intersection of technology, of education, and of democracy. And our broad sort of mission is to build shared prosperity and citizenship for Canada. I think this issue very nicely hits at the intersection of those areas. I won't give you the sort of the long spiel about the DAIS, but I would say we've been very focused in our work recently, amongst other things, on this sort of intersection of kids and technology, our kids and technology agenda. I would say, one big initiative we've recently launched, which we sort of put in the mobilization category, is called Screen Break. We're extremely excited about a multi-year initiative to support the smartphone restrictions that are rolling out across Canada, to make sure that they're put in place in ways that are effective and that can work for everyone from school board officials to educators to parents and of course students who really need to have more voice around some of these issues. We offer learning programs in these areas, including lesson plans we're developing for educators in middle and high school, but also for professionals working in these spaces with some interesting stuff we're going to be launching later this year. We do a bunch of research in this area, with this piece being a prime example that we're excited about. Also, our online harms survey that touches on social media online harms coming soon. And finally, on convening, with this also being an example, but some other work that we've done in that space. So just a very quick preview of how this fits within the broader suite of things that we're doing. So we're thrilled to have you here, as I said, as we explore this issue of genAI, privacy, and how these evolving technologies are being used and are impacting the next generations. In the past few years, as we know, we've witnessed this rapid development of AI tools that are reshaping the ways that we interact with information, with content, with each other. We know that there's a lot of potential for creativity, for learning, and for growth. But they also bring serious questions regarding privacy, security, and for youth especially, for well-being. And so today we're very excited to launch a new report that digs into these issues. And in addition to the report, we're also launching 2 practical tools we've developed. The first is for parents and educators, and the second for privacy practitioners, technologists, and policymakers. My colleagues Tiff and Christelle, the excellent authors of the report, will tell you a little bit more about that in a bit. And we'll share the link to our webpage so you can go and check it out for yourselves. And I would note that French versions of these will be released soon as well. So coming soon. So what are we going to be doing in the webinar today? The first part, Tiff and Christelle, the report's authors, are going to present the highlights of the report on genAI and kids' privacy. Then we're going to welcome a panel of experts, practitioners that are working, I would say at the intersection of technology, privacy, and education, who are going to share with us their insights, their perspectives about these issues surfaced in the report. And so I would encourage you all to be thinking critically as we're working through these issues, thinking about your experiences with them, as we'll be opening it up towards the end to your questions, to your thoughts, to give you an opportunity to engage with the panelists as well. And so last thing before we start, very important for us to acknowledge this work has been made possible with the support of the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, the OPC. So we're very grateful to them for supporting this report. I would note that the views expressed in the reports and in this event are those of the dais and of the participants, and so don't necessarily reflect those of the OPC. Just a caveat to start things off. And we're thrilled also to have with us Melvin Christopher, who's a policy and research analyst with the OPC and has been a great ally collaborator with us as we've been working through this project. And so I want to invite him just to say a few words before we get into the rest of the discussion today. So hi, Melvin, welcome. And
hello. Yeah, thanks for having me. I do have a couple slides just to walk through. You can just give me a thumbs up if you see my screen.
Looks good.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, as Andre mentioned, my name is Melvin Christopher. I'm a policy analyst here with the OPC, and I help administrate the program. Quickly, for folks who don't know, the mandate of our office is to protect and promote the privacy rights of Canadians. We're an independent agent of Parliament and directly report to Parliament. We oversee compliance with PIPEDA, and the contributions program itself is administered under PIPEDA. And accordingly, only research and public awareness proposals that address privacy issues in the private sector under PIPEDA are considered. And that's our commissioner there on the screen. So a little bit about the contributions program. It gives our office an opportunity to gain a deeper understanding of privacy issues and trends. And our office uses the resulting knowledge and insights to build a strong foundation in advising Parliament and developing policy positions conducted for investigations, promoting public awareness, and promoting for public awareness of privacy issues. And the program itself has existed since 2004, and our annual budget is $500,000. So what kind of projects do we fund? We really want to see research and public education projects aimed at promoting privacy and the protection of personal information in the private sector. And we want to see projects that help anticipate and define privacy issues that have the most significant impact on Canadians in the years to come. Last year in our previous call, we received a total of 67 funding applications. And of course, that's why I'm here today with one of our successful candidates. So our current call is live right now, and I'll speak more to that in our next slide. But again, why we're here today is from our last year's theme, which was based on 2 of our OPC strategic priorities. The first was addressing privacy impacts of new technologies, such as artificial intelligence and generative AI. And the second theme was ensuring that children's privacy is protected in this digital era. And of course, this project that you heard from more today tackled both of our strategic priorities. And I'll leave you kind of on one note before I jump off. The OPC has launched our call for proposals for the upcoming cycle, and this year's theme is about connected devices and how they collect, share, and use personal information. And you can visit the OPC website for more information or email us with the contact information that's on the screen there. And our applications are due March 25th. And just quick congrats to the team here, and I'm excited to hear from you all. Back to you, folks. Thank you.
Okay, amazing. Thank you, Melvin. So hopefully we've hit the mark in terms of the work we've done through this project. But also, I'm guessing there are others on this webinar who are working in these fields, and great to know about the further opportunities to work with, collaborate with you at the OPC. So that's terrific. So without any further ado, over to you, Christelle and Tiff, to take us through the report.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you, Melvin, for this overview of what the OPC does. Hello, everyone. My name is Christelle. I'm a policy and research assistant at the DAIS.
And my name's Tiffany, and I'm a policy analyst at the DAIS.
And today we will be sharing some key insights from this project we've been working on for the past few months. This work is situated at a time in which young people are growing up in an increasingly digital world, and where their personal information can be captured, shared, and used in many ways that were once unimaginable. With generative AI tools, these technologies uniquely put users in a position to interact with and create new content, whether that be photos and videos, to even exchanging messages with a chatbot. Or in school settings, it can be helpful for lesson plan creation or assessments. And we'll talk a little bit about this later on. So it is important to understand how young people learn, connect, and express themselves in their use of generative AI technology in order to create impactful privacy policy interventions. Next slide, please. So we'll start with the basics. What is generative AI? We borrow the definition used by the OECD, which defines generative AI as models that create new content in response to their prompts based on their training data. This can include text, programming language, audio, and video, for instance. Recognizing that generative AI can be used in many contexts, this project specifically focuses on generative AI tools that are directly present in the daily lives of Canadian children and teens through K-12 education, as well in social media platforms. Next slide, please. We've categorized some of the key uses of generative AI in our report, and this chart presents a few of them. This includes conversational chatbots to images, audio and video generation, as well as editing, translation, text generation, text editor, academic assessments, teaching assistants, tutoring, literature scanning, and learning management systems. There are a lot of different ways in which generative AI has been integrated in both leisure and educational uses by youth. Considering all of these use cases and applications, it's even more important to recognize and understand the privacy risks that come along with this technology and what to do about it. Because we outlined so many things in the report, I'll only talk about one right now, which is the use of conversational chatbots or, companion AI tools. A lot of the popular companies developing these tools are, Character AI, Replica, but also social media platforms that we know have also adopted companion tools into their product. Notably, Snapchat has a companion tool that users can talk to as if it was their friend. They can ask it advice about, personal friendships, or even like, what's the boiling point of water? And Meta as well has, integrated a conversational chatbot into their platform. However, these interactions raise a lot of risks to youth who may develop strong emotional bonds with these chatbots, by sharing personal or even sensitive information. And, as a result, sharing information about themselves, whether it's, personal, sensitive, or, the mundane, has several privacy risks. Notably, this information can be intercepted by a malicious actor or used by the platform itself to develop engagement tools that encourage kids to stay on the platform and share more about themselves. The concerns are here not only related to the individual's, emotional well-being and social development, but where the information or the data they share goes is often back into the training data for the AI model, putting it at risk of, being exploited by malicious actors or shared with third parties. Although these tools often have mechanisms to collect consent, the process in which it is collected is often unclear. So the question of whether user data is collected under informed consent remains a question. So it's not only about, personal information as well, it's about like all the other types of information that these platforms now have available as a result of generative AI. And, they can create profiling about youth tendencies and habits. And, that opens the door to a lot of harms. Next slide, please. So I'll briefly talk about the Canadian policy landscape, which we can sort of briefly define as a mosaic of different privacy and education statutes. At the federal level, private sector technology companies developing or providing generative AI tools have to abide by the federal privacy legislation, which is PIPEDA, Personal Information Protection and the Electronics Documents Act. Except in Quebec and Alberta and BC, where provincial laws apply, but they're, relatively similar in what they demand for companies. Furthermore, school boards have to abide by provincial public sector privacy legislation. So in Ontario, for instance, with Bill 194, we've been able to update privacy legislation as it pertains to minors. In addition to that, we also have, requirements for public sector entities using AI, which includes school boards. They'll have to develop, directives and frameworks in order to use these tools in a responsible and accountable way. And because the implementation hasn't begun yet, there's still a lot to see about its effectiveness. And then, education ministries, have been developing their own guidelines for the use of AI within school boards, with some, school boards even introducing their own policies, as we'll discuss later with the panel. For instance, in Ontario, we have the Waterloo Catholic School Board, as well as the Ottawa Catholic School Board, having developed their own guidelines, as well as resources for their parents. Next slide, please. So in terms of global regulatory approaches, I'll keep this brief, but there are different approaches. So in the European Union, there are laws, the GDPR, the AI Act, and the Digital Services Act, which apply to how information is processed by companies, how companies use and develop AI systems, and also how social media platforms, use generative AI. All have different requirements, but essentially focus on transparency reporting and accountable and responsible use of generative AI. In the UK, there are more technical efforts such as the Age-Appropriate Design Code. In the US, sorry, there's the Children's Online Privacy Protection Rule, COPPA, and then at the industry level, there are various efforts that are mostly technical interventions. We're thinking about child-friendly ways to present privacy information or even age assurance methods. There's also more practical guidance frameworks such as Australia's National Safer Technologies for Schools. And then now I'll hand it off to Tiff.
Thanks, Christelle. Yeah, so I'll just bring us to the second half of our presentation. What you see here is a diagram that was created by an AI expert, Blair Adderfrost, who's at U of T. Essentially what we did with this diagram is we adapted it to include some letters, which basically represent steps that can be taken at each stage of the generative AI system lifecycle. I won't get into each and every single letter here because we're a bit short on time, but you can check it out on our website. We did a deeper explanation, deep dive into each of these steps. And so I think sort of moving forward, what are some things that we can do to address and mitigate these privacy risks? There's tons of things, and I think the way that we approach this question is to divide it between those who are developing the technology and those who are governing the technology. So just a few key practices for technologists to keep in mind. To start off by adopting privacy-enhancing technologies and techniques, PETs, they're otherwise known as, which include things like differential privacy, homomorphic encryption, and anonymization techniques to minimize risk. So this could look like sort of, adding noise to your data set or anonymizing your data, which although aren't bulletproof, can still minimize risk. Another thing for companies to keep in mind, to just limit the data collection and retention. So deciding early on what types of data your organization needs and doesn't need to collect from users, and then ensuring that there's measures in place to sort of protect and honor your data processing and time limits for retention. As Christelle touched upon earlier, with youth-friendly design, so ensuring that youth privacy isn't something that is like an afterthought, but rather from the beginning to the end, youth privacy is at the highest default privacy level for minors for all technologies. So for example, chat history or model training options should be turned off by default. And then strengthening AI safety and cybersecurity. So ensuring there's accountability mechanisms, there's pre-assessments, things like privacy impact assessments or data protection impact assessments. There's tons. So making sure those happen and are documented for accountability measures. And then moving on to sort of what policymakers should be thinking of. We definitely need youth-specific privacy protections, whether it be consent mechanisms or greater transparency around data collection and processing, age-appropriate wording, like Christelle mentioned earlier, bite-sized language. These should all be put in place. Within organizations themselves, having those age-appropriate privacy policies in terms of service, that should be a given and shouldn't be something that is developed afterwards or after the product is released. Another one, banning data collection without explicit consent. So this is similar to the EU's GDPR protections for minors, making sure that informed consent is received. And so this could include, including simplified privacy dashboards or a complete ban on the use of dark patterns so that people really truly understand what they're agreeing to when they use the technology and it's something that's youth appropriate. Enforcing accountability for tech companies. So beyond just, legal consequences for companies that fail to secure youth data, which is necessary, also provide, examples of companies that are doing well and incentivize privacy protecting technologies to be built so that companies can learn from each other. And then finally, also just creating sector-specific guidelines for AI in education. And we'll hear from Tom shortly, who's doing a lot of work in this space. And I think it's sort of creating those standards so that school boards can work off of it and customize it to their own local needs would definitely be a great approach moving forward so that, schools aren't just scrambling to know what to do or just unclear direction all around in terms of in relation to privacy and security concerns. As for educators and school administration, here's some key best practices to keep in mind. So obviously following your school board's privacy impact assessment decisions on all technologies, opting for generative AI tools that require minimal or no personal data input about your students, and just chatting with other educators and school boards about their approaches to learn from each other and to share best practices is something that we definitely heard among some of the experts that we interviewed. For parents, obviously staying actively informed, and this goes beyond just generative AI technologies, knowing what digital tools your kids are using is obviously something that's important, having those candid conversations, and then obviously making efforts to maintain digital fluency. And this might be difficult, but, things like reading articles, listening to a podcast. We've also linked some of these resources in one of the infographic briefs that's linked on our website. So feel free to check one of those out. It's on the second page. So yeah, I know we just sort of sped through these key findings, but we really wanted you all to hear from our great panelists. And so I'll hand it off to Andre for this next portion.
Okay, amazing. Thank you, Tiff, and thanks, Christelle. And so obviously there's a lot more to dig into in the report, but that's a great overview of what it covers and some of the sort of crunchier advice on the back end, and also that's included in the infographic tools that have been rolled out. So we are thrilled to have with us this terrific panel that's now shown on screen. So Tom D'Amico is Director of Education at the Ottawa Catholic School Boards from my hometown. Saba Saheli Singh is Assistant Professor of Digital Futures in Education at York University. And Chris Parsons is Acting Director of Technology Policy at the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, the IPC. And so rather than, doing the readouts of your interesting bios, why don't I turn it over to each of you to briefly introduce yourselves, and then we will open up the conversation. So Tom, why don't we turn to you first?
Sure. Afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Andre, for the introduction. My name is Tom D'Amico. I'm the director in Ottawa Catholic, as you heard. We're a publicly funded education institution, K-12. We support 50,000 students across 89 schools. We're in year 2 of our AI journey. So year 1 was a year of learning, and year 2 has been a year of implementation. So we've certainly been part of various networks right across Canada and doing work in Ontario as well with different districts when it comes to AI. I'm not sure if you wanted me to reflect on what we've seen so far or just leave it at that.
Well, why don't you leave it there, and then we'll come back to the reflections right after. So Sava, would you mind introducing yourself for us, please, as well?
Sure. Thank you so much for this report. I've been reading through it and it's really great. And for organizing this conversation and for inviting me to participate. My name, as you said, is Sava Saheli Singh, and I'm a filmmaker and assistant professor of digital futures of education at York University here in Toronto. I did live in Ottawa briefly and I really liked it. And I also want to say that I was also fortunate to be, for one of my projects, to be funded by the OPC. So I'm also a great supporter of the OPC and the work that they do and the work that they support. So I'm happy to be part of that as well. Just to give a little bit of my background, my work is interdisciplinary, but focuses mostly on the social, cultural, educational, and carceral impacts of technology. Most of my work is around technologically mediated surveillance, which includes AI. And the focus of my research and teaching is around critical digital literacy that includes not only understanding how technologies work and shape our experiences of the world and each other, but I also work to help people critically examine the context of these technologies, right? Especially in terms of like who is harmed in the making of these technologies, who controls the data, who stands to gain financially and in terms of power, and how we might push back against billionaire tech bros and reclaim agency from those who seek to exploit us and see us only as data. So that's a quick intro to who I am. Thank you.
Okay, amazing. And Chris, last but not least, over to you.
So thanks again for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here, and really appreciate the report and a lot of the thought and care that has been put into all of it, which comes through in what's been published. So I'm currently the Acting Director of Technology Policy at Ontario's Information and Privacy Commissioner's Office. So we oversee Ontario's provincial, municipal privacy and access legislation, as well as the Children's, Youth and Family Services Act and Part 10 of the Anti-Racism Act. So the team that I lead is a small but mighty team of technologists. And so one of the many areas that we're looking at includes artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence. And so we've been very active in this policy space for the past 5 or 6 years. And some of our most recent activities have been at the international level, working with Global Privacy Assembly, nationally working with all of Canada's privacy regulators to establish principles for the use of generative artificial intelligence technologies. And then obviously provincially, where most of our time is spent, and most recently focused on Bill 194, which includes some provisions for establishing regulations around generative artificial intelligence. And beyond that, my team does all sorts of technology. So generative AI is one of the many that we get to play with on a pretty regular basis in the policy and technology space.
Okay, that's fantastic. And I would note that in your past life, I guess you were also at U of T at the Citizen Lab, right? Huge admirer of all the work that you did. I'm actually reading Ron Diebert's book, his new book right now, which I think you make a few appearances in. So anyways, we're thrilled to have all three of you with us. So Tom, I stopped you in the first instance, but let's turn back to right where you were. I guess the first sort of broad question, how are each of you, what are your sort of different lenses in terms of engaging with GenAI technologies in your roles, and what would be your sort of broad reflections on the study, the findings? So a wide open question for you to sort of kick it off.
Yeah, I appreciate the report. It really does highlight the realities of what's happening right now in K-12, that we are living and educating in the age of AI. There's certainly excitement in the K-12 sector about the generative AI tools that are available, but there's also the caution and the need to look at how can we plan for that privacy and security of the end user data that we're entrusted by our students and our parents. So we have to take steps to handle that data appropriately, and that really pushes us to focus on AI literacy. So in my particular role as a director, I use AI almost on a daily basis. I'm using it whether it's for presentations, summarizing, analyzing research, using it for video translation, different tools that help me in my job function. Those are very different than the tools our students are using to help them learning as in the education space for studying, for understanding. And it's different than our educators are using to help impart that knowledge on our students. So definitely the report is needed. It's timely. We have to focus on that privacy and security of data. But at the same time, we don't want to forget about all the advantages it can have in supporting learning. So I'll leave it at that for the first question.
Okay, and can I ask just one quick follow-up, because you sort of led off by saying you're now in year 2 of your AI journey. You sort of moved from planning to implementation. I would surmise, and I think some of our Tiff and Christelle would know this better, but I think you are probably at the leading edge of a lot of this vis-a-vis other school boards. It feels as though it's a space where there's some experimentation, a lot of catch-up happening, but maybe not necessarily the intentionality that you've been approaching this with. So can you maybe just say a few more words about where you're at with Ottawa Catholic and what you're seeing across the sort of school board communities?
Yeah, certainly. 2 years ago, we started by joining a network from Advanced Learning Partnerships. They were supporting about 30 districts in the United States who were well ahead of us. So we visited some of those districts to find out what work had they done, what lessons learned, how were they addressing privacy. And then this was our first year of implementing. So we're now part of several networks in Ontario and across Canada where we're all sharing knowledge, we're all learning. There really are no experts in AI in K-12, but we want to share our experiences. So yes, I would say we were an early adopter, and we have put in place some of the security measures that are needed. We're now sharing that with our colleagues, and we're learning from them as well. BC would be the other area where we've seen a lot of work happen. We're working with, there's about 12 districts in BC that have done some work with ALP. And Dr. Michael Fullen, who some of you may know as an education researcher and expertise, he's put together a network across Canada that continues to work on sharing strategies. There's also a group called C21, Canadians for 21st Century Learning. It's a cross-Canada group of directors, superintendents, and we also meet about once a month, and we're sharing what's happening in this space.
Okay, super helpful, super helpful. So Sava, let's turn back to you. You talked about how your focus is on tech-mediated surveillance, including AI, and this big focus on critical digital literacy. Obviously, a critical lens, I would say, generally around a lot of the activity that's happening here. Can you give us your kind of opening salvo, I guess, on all this?
Sure, and I realize that I'm probably in the minority, the vast minority, when I say this, that I do not use AI at all in my work. It doesn't touch my work. It doesn't touch my students' work, as in I don't let it touch it. I know that, unfortunately, it's disheartening to see how many technologies and tools have just forced it upon us, right? We talk about consent, we talk about informed consent, but is informed consent like if you click yes, you get to use it, and if you click no, you don't get to use it? That's not consent, right? That's coercion. So it's always worrying to me how quickly so much of this has been forced on us, and we are left kind of trying to figure out how to respond to it. Like I really appreciate what Tom was saying in terms of like, okay, this is here now, what do? We need to find out what other people are doing and figure out how to respond to it, rather than being the people who are like, hey, do you need this? How can we make this? How can we implement this without causing the harms that have come? So to shorten that, my engagement with genAI is very different in the sense that I spend a lot of time trying to get people to understand past harms, right? The stuff that needed to happen for this to exist right now. For example, exploitation of data workers. The way AI works is that you have a lot of data that needs to be cleaned. This was done by people predominantly not paid very well, a lot of them in the global south, some even in refugee camps who had to look at data that was connected to the conflicts that they escaped, right? So when you see some of these stories, you're like, hang on, what am I using and what needed to happen for this to exist? So I try to get people to understand some of that. I also try to get people to understand what are like current problems, right? Like what was used to create this, right? A lot of like they scrape the internet. The internet is not really a great place to get a lot of data. We know that, right? We've all interacted with the internet. We've all seen the kinds of harmful stuff that's on there, right? So all of that has helped to create this thing. There's a lot of there's been researchers who've unearthed child sexual abuse material that has been used, right? There's a lot of people's work. Like I have friends who are artists and writers whose jobs have been taken away, right? Or who see that they're being told that they're not needed anymore because this tool can do their work, which is also a lie, which is a different thing. So I try to get people to think about that. I try to get people to think about current harms, right? The environmental impact of running these things is huge. I think a lot more people are understanding some of the more environmental things. This is also a labor thing, right? It's hard for me to fault teachers and educators to reach for these tools because they are so strapped for time. When you cut money and funding to education, that means you're cutting people, right? You're cutting administrative people, you're cutting support in IT, right? So the teachers find themselves not having enough time to do all the tasks that they now have to take on. So this is a labor issue as well, right? So I don't blame them for reaching for tools, saying like, I need to spend time with my family. So this thing is helping me do a thing so that I can have time back to myself. And I understand that, but I think we need to refocus that and be like, what is really happening here, right? So I try to get people to think about that as well. In addition to that, there's a lot of these tools are being used for misinformation, for disinformation, for doing additional sexual abuse on minors, on other people, right? I also want to think about future harms, right? There's research that's showing when young people use tools like this, it kind of doesn't help them develop their critical thinking skills. It helps in cognitive decline. I've already talked about the environmental degradation, the climate change. We're continuing to disregard indigenous rights and lands. For the economic and social stratification is happening based on access to technology. So at first it's released as this free thing that everyone can use. And now it's like, oh, do you want to use the latest thing? Well, you now have to pay. So, right. So now it becomes a question of like, it's almost like you're being held captive, right? In terms of like your choices on some of this. So I'll stop there and kind of, some of my further points will come in our further discussion, but that's kind of where I'm coming from. Like, I don't use it and I try to get people to understand why this is a really harmful thing. It already has done so much harm. It is doing harm and it will do future harm. So that's kind of my approach to this.
Okay, thank you. And so as you said in your kickoff, it's really focusing on a lot of the contextual issues around it. It's a lot of the upstream AI supply chain and a lot of the sort of downstream impacts as well, beyond just the actual risks or implications for youth and for others using it. Chris, over to you. Your initial thoughts and impressions.
Yeah, so I've been involved with AI and generative AI in particular in a number of ways since joining the IPC. So I'm a bit different from many of my colleagues here in that I've had 3 roles in about 2 and change years. So I've been both the Senior Technology and Policy Advisor, I've been the Manager of Technology Policy, and now I'm the Acting Director of the unit. So each has meant that I've been involved with very different activities, from very hands-on to, at this point, more shaping. So some of the work that I've been involved in and the IPC has been involved in is conducting research, developing policy positions, advising on legislative recommendations, speaking publicly to Ontarians, to senior bureaucrats, as well as to legislators. And so within Ontario, what has that meant? Well, we've done work, my team has done work with the IPC's Quasi-Judicial Tribunal on the McMaster AI proctoring decision. We've collaborated with the Ontario Human Rights Commission to develop and promulgate a set of shared AI principles. Those principles are valid and reliable. From NIST, stuff should work first before you start deploying it further. It should be safe, privacy protective, transparent, accountable, and human rights affirming. It's worth noting, you can look at those on our website in our Bill 194 submission. And a key component of those is, we're not talking about safe in the same way as some parties do. We're just really thinking through, how do you use these technologies in ways that advance the environment? How do they avoid causing harm to life, liberty, the economy, and so forth? Human rights affirming as opposed to minimizing impact on human rights. So we're really trying to think of a slightly different way of framing the AI discussion. How do we build these tools for what we want them to do, as opposed to how should these tools be developed and deployed with a minimum of harm? Of course, we want that minimum of harm, but really just trying to change the framing a little bit. And then we've also done work in our Privacy Day in 2024 on AI technologies. We also work externally with the government and other parties who are exploring the uses of generative AI technologies. And the IPC has also been very active both internationally and nationally. So that includes the Global Privacy Assembly, which is all of the world's data regulators. So that's on resolutions such as on generative artificial intelligence and employment, as well as on generative AI and intelligence systems, as well as convening panels amongst the regulators, journalists, and academics who are present. Nationally, we've worked with the other federal, provincial, and territorial commissioners to issue the principles for responsible, trustworthy, and privacy-protected generative AI technologies. These are meant to guide and inform developers, operators, and users of these technologies. And they apply whether you're government, whether you're a private sector, and really are used to set the expectations of regulators from across the country. And then in addition to sort of those activities, my team regularly monitors the technology developments that are happening. We have a dedicated AI expert on staff, as well as many others on my team, both at a policy and a technical lens that are monitoring developments so that we're able to respond as we're able. And really our work right now is both to prefigure the AI policy space so that we have a clear strategy and can communicate that strategy to other parties. That's then used to guide our interventions and our advice, both on high-level policy engagement around generative AI, and then some of the more operational uses that we're starting to see across the province.
Okay, excellent. So you were engaged in this in a broad number of ways. One thing I did want to ask about was Bill 94. Oh, sorry, 194, because we've been tracking that closely, but maybe we'll come back to that in just a minute. So these are sort of I would say that that each of your sort of broad approaches. Let's try and zoom in a little bit more on the issue of children and youth specifically. And so the report goes through on a pretty specific level the types of privacy risks that we've seen or that could be encountered. So I'd like to ask each of you, from your perspectives, what are the major risks that you're encountering? Tom, I'm curious. You're now sort of, it sounds like, right into the thick of it in terms of the implementation. What are the the really practical challenges or risks that you're encountering? And I'd note, I was on a call earlier this morning with someone from the Center for Humane Tech in the U.S. They were talking about basically supporting the lawsuit against Character AI, which was tied to this terrible story of a youth suicide last year. So I mean, some really practical and awful types of challenges like that. But I'm curious what you're encountering.
Yeah, it's an important question, and you have to look at that in the context that organizations have two sets of roles in K-12. So one is the adults within your organization, and then there's the children. So what we're seeing is the adults are being taken care of. So when you look at the tools that adults are using, it tends to be ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, it could be Amazon's AWS or services from Dell. There's a trusting relationship with the employer. And generally, there's been a full privacy impact assessment before those tools are released to the employees. So the employees' data is secure. But what's happening with our students, especially teenagers, is they're using free tools. So when they leave the confines of a school board or their particular school, they're going to Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, and they're using Meta AI. They're also using Snap AI. So that's what we're finding from our focus groups with our students. That's the versions they're using. And they're not paying for those versions, so they're giving away a portion of their data and their privacy in exchange for the use of those tools. And that's the trade-off. So it's really important that in K-12, we teach data literacy and AI literacy. When we teach AI literacy, then they can be informed consumers. And we have issues that there's lessons learned from social media where we made the assumption that kids would know what they were doing. They were digital natives. Those were all false narratives. They didn't know what they were doing. They were not digital natives. They were kids who were using those tools, and we've seen the a negative impact, but that's not the focus of this report. This is about AI, but we have to take lessons learned to protect their data, to teach them AI literacy. Definitely huge risks because they're using free tools, whereas the schools, the school boards generally will, during class time, eventually get to the point where they're paying for services, and that brings with it the data security that we need for all of our students. One last point I'll add in Ottawa Catholic, our students from ages 13 and above do have access to Google Gemini. That's a tool we're providing. And we've done that assessment to make sure that we're protecting their data. It's not being used for training. Microsoft Copilot in the education field is doing the same thing. But when you ask students what's their go-to tool, it's the ones I mentioned, and it's the free version of ChatGPT. It's not the ones where the data has been secured and we're not selling their data and we're not giving away the option of using their information for training. So it's a real concern right now.
Okay, that's great. And so I just posted in the chat, we'll start to open things up to the audience as well for comments and questions. But Sav, over to you. So quickly around youth privacy risks specifically, what are you most concerned about?
I'll be reasonably quick. I think the privacy issues are vast, and I think a lot of what Tom kind of outlined very much applies. I'm also hesitant to trust some of these companies when they say that they're not taking data, and what do they mean by that, right? Are they training their own data sets? What's happening? So I think there's needs to be more understanding of what those things actually mean. I also think I'm going to sound a little different here when I say this, but what's the point of youth privacy if we don't have a world in which to have that, right? To some degree. So I think we do need to keep in mind some of the impacts, larger impacts of these technologies, and, listen to young people too, right? They're telling us what is important to them, and we should be responding to that. It is different for adults and kids for sure, but also to some degree, I think adults don't always have the level of digital literacy that they should, or they don't know how to do that, critical examination of some of this. So I think also letting youth know that there are youth around the world whose privacy has already been kind of breached, to use that word, and to kind of think about how we need to think broadly about youth in general all over, right? Not just my kid is doing this, like we are all connected. And so how do we kind of respond to a larger question, and how do we have those conversations and be open about that? I think one of the things, and I don't know if I'll be able to get to this, so I'll throw this in, but as an educator, one of the things that I try to kind of encourage other educators to do and other institutions to do is to very explicitly, we are not given the right frameworks for consent from these companies, so we can build those into ours, right? When I am in my classroom, my students are not allowed to use ChatGPT, and I tell them, like, if you're reaching for ChatGPT because you're late on assignment, reach for an email instead. I will give you an extension because I understand life, I understand you're dealing with a lot, right? On the other hand, like I encourage educators, because a lot of people are using ChatGPT in making their lesson plans and doing grading, and that breaks my heart to a large degree. But I want to say, create a context in which, if you're an educator, you give students the option to actually opt out, right? Are you creating your lessons and saying, like, okay, we're going to use ChatGPT for this thing? Do you let students know that, look, if you don't want to use it, here's another way of doing the lesson, right? Give real opt-outs to our students and to the young people to really opt out. If a student understands the environmental implications of this and decides they don't want AI, broadly speaking, to touch their work or for them to engage with it, are we as educators and institutions creating those real opt-out situations for our students? And I think that's an important thing too, right? Like letting students know that they can really opt out of something rather than the fake consent that they give in order to access something. So I think that would be a great way to approach privacy for youth as well, which is like build that into our systems. If a student is in your school, doesn't want to use it, make that explicit and say, like, if you don't want to use it, this is how you can function. You can still access everything you need to, you just don't need to use it, right? So be really intentional about doing that stuff in our own kind of spheres.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you. So Chris, I'll turn to you. Maybe just in the interest of time, I'll shift from the privacy risk question to the what should we be doing about it question. So you're obviously heavily involved both through the activities of the IPC, also trying to engage with government. In Ontario's case, Bill 194 is, I think, I would describe it as an ambitious but framework legislation with a lot of the details to be filled in. And I believe the IPC was also part of an investigation of OpenAI that launched a year or two ago. So curious about, how are you thinking about what measures we take to improve youth privacy?
Yeah, so thanks for this. I'll just note that the federal commissioner, along with some of the other provincial bodies, were involved in the OpenAI investigations and in other investigations into private sector companies and their uses of AI. Because our mandate does not include a private sector mandate, those are activities that we watch our cousins pursue with some interest, but it is a matter that they're pursuing. So the IPC, as I'd mentioned previously, has been working at a lot of levels in the policy space to influence kinds of activities that educational sectors should be paying attention to and being mindful of. So we're very aware of the possible uses and potentially very negative uses of personal information that could be collected from children and youth as they use these tools, as well as the potential for these technologies to be used in fairly inappropriate and harmful ways, such as through deepfakes, cheapfakes, both video, still imagery, audio, and written. So as I mentioned previously, one of our earliest interventions really began in force with OHRC in 2023 with a joint issuance of a letter that identified our core principles, which I mentioned previously. The reason why we thought that was so important is we know that privacy doesn't actually cover the whole water's edge. Human rights is a key component, and we have one mandate, they have another. So first, we've been partnering with other organizations to try and demonstrate to regulators in other sectors, as well as policymakers and legislators, the importance and that this is a combined issue. You mentioned Bill 194, and so there's two schedules to that. So the first part of it addressed cybersecurity, AI, and children's use of technologies. And in that, we advanced the principles that I mentioned earlier with OHRC to say these should be included in statute. We also called for no-go zones, risk-based regulation, and other things. Sadly, the principles nor any of our other recommendations were adopted by the government at the time. And the result is that Bill 194 really is a bit of an empty vessel when it comes to that first schedule. It empowers the government to establish regulations or directives that will guide how provincial ministries and other parties will be permitted to use these technologies, but it'll only be based on the regulations. So right now, the framework is there, but how it will be actioned is a bit of an open question. That having been said, we have seen positive things. So again, those principles that I mentioned, they're not in the legislation, the statute, which we're disappointed by, but they were integrated and now form the backbone of the Ontario government's trustworthy and responsible AI principles that are meant to guide how the provincial government adopts AI, which we thought was a very positive activity. And we, of course, will continue to champion Ontarians' access and privacy rights with regards to generative AI and other systems. And then, as I mentioned, previously, there's also a national level set of principles that we've put forward with the OPC and all other data protection regulators in the country. They set clear and actionable principles, what we expect, what questions you should be asking, whether you're developing or deploying. And we make a very specific call out to vulnerable populations, and in that make clear that children are amongst them. And so we note that children have unique characteristics that need to be considered. They are less able to identify the challenges associated with biased outputs. They're prone to having their agency limited, and maybe less able to understand the long-term harms of the technologies. And so on that basis, we say that organizations using generative AI technologies to develop tools and systems and such really have to actively work to mitigate risks to vulnerable populations. And then in addition to that, I would just note that the IPC has released guidance in 2024 on contracting. And you may ask, why does contracting apply in a conversation about generative AI technologies? It's because it makes clear the obligations that Ontario organizations have when they're contracting with third parties. Privacy isn't something that you can outsource. Organizations remain accountable and responsible when they're contracting to other parties. And so we point to that as a way that organizations can help to inform their practices when they are developing or integrating these third-party tools. And then lastly, I'll just note be no surprise, but my team and the rest of the IPC will and do continue to work tirelessly to provide education to the public, government bureaucrats, senior decision makers, and ministers, all in the service of ensuring that new technologies, including generative AI technologies, are adopted in privacy protective and responsible ways that do not inappropriately intrude into Ontarians' privacy or access rights.
Okay, excellent. So we want to make sure we have everyone out right at the top of the hour. So we'll close with one last question, and then I'll hand it back to Tiff. So one of the questions that came in from the audience really gets at how do we get parents to care? Parents are obviously key, as we're talking about children and youth. Parents are obviously key constituents in this discussion. How do we get them to care about platforms collecting data on their children? And I guess what I would ask would be your kind of 30-second to 1 minute response and kind of call to action on why we need to care about dealing with this. So Tom, I'll come back to you first.
Well, we involve our parents. So we have 5 guiding principles. Our parents receive that. We have responsible use of technology agreements that every parent receives every single year. We're teaching AI literacy every single grade level from 1 to 12 every single year. So they're getting that in the Ottawa Catholic School Board. We're running focus groups with parents. We do presentations to parents. We've sent out videos. We're sharing with them why we're embracing AI, going back to the focus on education and learning, but also looking at that humane and ethical use. Because we believe that their children can change the future and can solve the problems that we haven't been able to solve without AI. So that's how we're involving parents and getting them to care.
Okay, amazing. If you could share those with my kids' junior school, that would be terrific. Sava, over to you. Your sort of 30-second kind of last words on why we need to care about this, or how parents should care.
I think encouraging everyone to have really honest conversations about AI and, like I said, past harms, present harms, future harms, because I think it's important to understand what terrible things needed to happen for this cool, fun tool to make this cool, crazy, picture or whatever to exist, right? And to really focus in on critically thinking about this and how do we kind of make good on those harms, right? How do we fix those things? But just generally having really, instead of turning to surveillance tools, talk to your kids and engage them in conversations around them and build trust with each other rather than having technology be between you and that trust, right? And so I think just really learning about it and then having great conversations and honest conversations and trusting your kids, I think is a good way to start.
Okay, thank you. Chris, over to you. Last word.
Yeah, so the Ontario regulator, the group that we deal with most is government, large organizations. And so really, I think that one of the primary ways that we reach out and try and work to parents is frankly through educating the bigger organizations. So we spend a lot of time working with the ministries, working in various educational environments to spread awareness about privacy writ large and educate why privacy is important and how technologies work. And so part of our role is almost educating the educators from our perspective so that they're then able to communicate that down. And we know one of the key things that we've spent the past year and change doing is really actively promoting what we've identified as our digital privacy charter. So this is to encourage school boards to adopt a series of privacy protections, which most organizations are already doing, because we know that Ontario educators are responsible, thoughtful, careful, and really committed to the children and youth and their care. So we are using a number of mechanisms both to help organizations understand the privacy implications of generative AI, encourage organizations to sign up to the Digital Privacy Charter so that parents and teachers are aware of sort of the protections that are provided. And then, of course, we engage in consultations with organizations with some frequency when they might be adopting this technology or other technologies that have a privacy impact.
Okay, excellent. Well, a big thanks to all three of you for joining us and for your excellent insights on these issues. And I will hand things back over to Tiff to provide our sort of closing remarks.
Okay, thank you, Andre. Thank you to all our panelists for joining. I'll just take the next 10 seconds to thank the people on our team who were also, some of them were able to join, some of them not, just to thank them for helping us to make this come to life. So Andre, Christelle, Nina, Mariana, Viet, Ashna, and Catherine. So just so everyone knows, the report and the tools will also be available on our website, so you can check them out over there. And yeah, have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank
Cheers.
you.